If I were your age, I'd drive that RV straight to the Grand Canyon and never look back, Rose said, leaning casually on the weather-worn wooden fence that separated her grandmother's house from Victor's. Victor didn't look up immediately. His hands were occupied with a faded microfiber cloth and a rearview mirror that had lost its shine years ago. But when he did glance up, his eyes held that quiet intensity like someone who'd seen things, felt them, and packed them away neatly in the glove box of memory. "Is that so?" he said, standing and stretching his back, the joints complaining like a car that hadn't been started in a while. Rose shrugged. "Yeah, I'd stock up on beef jerky and gas station coffee, put on some Al Green and just go." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Why Al Green?" "Because it's the kind of music that makes you think life still has a chance to surprise you," she said, smiling as she took a bite of her apple. "Plus, you strike me as a guy who's got soul but tries to hide it behind socket wrenches." Victor smirked. "That so?" She nodded. "That's so." They stood in companionable silence for a moment. The late summer sun filtered through the trees, casting a golden glow on Victor's driveway, where the old RV sat like an aging prizefighter, still proud, still capable, but aching in all the joints. "You ever actually take her out lately?" Rose asked, jerking her chin toward the RV. "Not since my son left for college," Victor said quietly. "Oh, is he close by?" "Seattle." "That's not close." "Nope." "Well, that explains the silence over here," she said. "You should take her out again. Stretch her legs." "She's got arthritis," Victor replied dryly. Rose laughed. "So do I, but I still dance when nobody's looking." He chuckled, shaking his head. "What brings a young city girl like you to Charlotte? Thought y'all liked rooftop bars and overpriced coffee." Rose looked away for a beat. Needed to unplug, reset, get back to roots and all that. Victor didn't press. He understood the weight behind simple answers. "I'm staying at Grandma Whitaker's," she continued. "She's in assisted living now. Left the house to me. Thought I'd paint a little. See if there's anything left to say." "You paint?" Rose nodded. "Mostly people, sometimes places, always in color." Victor turned back to the RV, polishing the chrome trim absent-mindedly. "That's good. World could use more color." Rose bit her lip. "You ever think about just going? Going where? Does it matter?" Victor looked at her, really looked this time. Her hair was messy, her jeans stained with paint, and her eyes too honest for someone so young. "Used to," he admitted. "Thought about driving to Montana once. Then I thought about gas prices." She laughed again. "If I were your age, I'd just go. Screw gas prices. There's something about the open road that makes the world feel honest." Victor paused. "Who says you need to be my age?" Rose blinked. "Is that an invitation?" He didn't answer. Later that day, while Victor was under the RV replacing a rusted pipe, a folded sketch was slipped under the tire. He crawled out and opened it. A pencil drawing of the two of them in the RV, him behind the wheel, her laughing with her feet out the window. Underneath, in her looping script, was written, "What are we waiting for?" That night, Victor sat alone, fingers brushing the drawing's edge. He turned on the old stereo. Al Green filled the room like a long-forgotten memory. He closed his eyes. The next morning, Rose opened her door to find the RV keys resting on the welcome mat. Tucked under was a yellow sticky note that simply said, "She still runs." The engine groaned to life like a bear waking from hibernation. Victor sat behind the wheel, his hands steady but his breath shallow. The RV hadn't moved in nearly 3 years, yet this morning under the early Carolina sky streaked with gold and mist, she rolled forward with reluctant grace, as if sensing her purpose had returned. Rose climbed up the steps like she belonged there. She wore a denim jacket over her paint-splattered hoodie and carried a canvas tote full of sketchbooks, trail mix, and a battered Polaroid camera. "You sure about this?" Victor asked, glancing sideways. His tone was level, but beneath it swirled a cautious curiosity, as if he were asking himself the same thing. Rose dropped into the passenger seat, kicking her feet up on the dashboard like she'd done it 100 times. "You left the key," she said. "I figured that was code for bring snacks." Victor smirked, shifted the RV into drive, and they pulled onto the empty road with only the morning sun and a thin ribbon of asphalt ahead of them. For the first 20 miles, they didn't talk much. The tires hummed beneath them, and old Motown played softly from the crackling speakers. Victor kept his eyes on the road, navigating back roads and side streets like muscle memory. Rose watched him in quiet intervals, as if studying a landscape that shifted every time she blinked. "So, what's the destination?" she asked eventually. Victor shrugged. "Figured we'd head west for a bit. Maybe stop at Cherokee Falls, camp somewhere quiet." Rose nodded, her fingers idly tracing the edge of her sketchbook. "Sounds poetic." He side-eyed her. "You expecting poetry?" She grinned. "I packed markers." Later, they stopped at a gas station on the edge of a county line. While Victor filled the tank, Rose wandered into the small convenience store. She returned with a brown paper bag and a bottle of sweet tea. "What's in the bag?" he asked. "A surprise," she said, holding it out dramatically. Inside was a roll of duct tape, a neon pink air freshener shaped like a flamingo, and a small hand-painted sign that read, "Adventure begins here." Victor held it up, amused. "You trying to redecorate?" "Trying to commemorate," she said. "This is day one. We need tokens." He didn't argue. He let her tape the sign above the windshield, let her hang the ridiculous flamingo from the rear-view mirror. Somewhere between mile 50 and mile 90, he found himself smiling without noticing. They pulled over near a creek just past noon, unpacked sandwiches and sat on a rock under the shade of a stubborn oak. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It had morphed into something softer, like the hush before a song begins. "Can I ask you something?" Rose said, her voice low. Victor nodded. "Why did you really invite me?" He looked at her, then out across the water. "I've been stuck, for a long time. Stuck in this house, this life. Ever since Darlene passed, he paused. "I stopped planning anything. Then you showed up with your paint and your big laugh and your questions." He shrugged. "And I thought maybe I didn't want to be stuck anymore." Rose was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, when I first moved back here, I thought I was running away. Turns out I was just running towards something and didn't know it." She plucked a blade of grass, twisted it around her finger. "I didn't expect it to look like an old RV and a man who hides his heart in engine grease." Victor chuckled, the sound deep and unfamiliar in his own chest. "You think I hide my heart?" "Please," she said, leaning back. "You've got more walls than a museum." He didn't deny it. That night, they camped off a small trail road. Victor built a fire with practiced ease, and Rose sketched the flames, capturing their flicker and wildness with charcoal strokes. She offered him a drawing, just lines and light, but he tucked it into his coat pocket without a word. As the fire died down, she looked over and asked, "Did she like to travel, Darlene?" Victor stared at the embers. "She did. We had plans, road trips, little ones, but we always said we'd go big one day. Grand Canyon, Yellowstone, coast to coast. Why didn't you?" "Life got in the way, work, bills, then sickness." He swallowed. "We kept saying next summer, but next summer never came." "And," Rose nodded, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Maybe this is her summer too." Victor looked up. Something in his expression shifted, less guarded, more open. "Maybe," he whispered. In the quiet that followed, a coyote howled somewhere in the distance. Rose didn't flinch. Victor didn't reach for the flashlight. Instead, they stayed where they were, surrounded by trees and stars and unspoken truths. Before they turned in, Rose wrote on the back of a receipt and taped it to the cabinet above her bedroll. Day 1, still running, but now in the right direction. Victor watched her climb into her sleeping bag, hair tangled from the breeze, and wondered if she realized how much her laughter lingered like smoke, like perfume, like hope. If this moment made you pause, made you think of the summers that never came, or the dreams parked too long in your driveway hit like. Or tell us in the comments what you're still waiting to say yes to, and subscribe to the channel to join Victor. Morning crept in gently through the RV's small, foggy window panes. Victor was up before the birds, already outside boiling water over the campfire ring for coffee. He'd slept lightly, not out of discomfort, but because his mind had been full of laughter that didn't belong to ghosts, of drawings taped to cabinets, of a silence that felt less like solitude and more like shelter. Rose stepped out barefoot, rubbing her eyes, hoodie draped over one shoulder like a makeshift robe. "You always up this early?" she asked, her voice gravelly from sleep. "Comes with age and bad knees," Victor replied, handing her a chipped mug. She took it and sat across from him, cradling the warmth between her palms. "Can we stay one more day here?" she asked. "I want to paint that creek." Victor nodded. We got nowhere to be. She spent the afternoon perched on a flat rock, easel balanced precariously on uneven ground, brush in hand, strokes dancing between shades of blue and gray. Victor tinkered with a bent cabinet hinge inside the RV, humming a tune he hadn't thought of in years. Occasionally, he'd glance outside, watching the wind catch her curls, her focus sharp and eyes full of intent. When she finally stepped back from the canvas, she called out, "You want to see?" He walked over, hands in his jacket pockets, and stood beside her. The painting wasn't perfect, but it was real. The water shimmered with motion, the trees stood tall but not overwhelming, and the RV sat nestled among them like it belonged there. "It's good," he said. "It's us," she corrected. That night, after grilled cheese and tomato soup cooked over a tiny propane burner, Rose pulled out her Polaroid camera. "Let's make this official." She took a photo of Victor sitting by the fire, squinting and mid-laugh. She snapped another of the RV, and then one of herself making a goofy face. She taped them to the overhead cabinet with care. "Now it's home," she said. Victor didn't say much, but he stayed up after she went to sleep, staring at the little row of images, wondering when the RV stopped being just a shell and started feeling like something beating again. The next morning, they hit the road. Victor took back roads, the kind lined with old barns and rusted mailboxes, where time seemed to move slower. Rose sang along to old country ballads, horribly off-key, but with enough heart to make Victor grin. At a roadside antique shop, she insisted they stop. "We need a talisman," she declared. Inside, she rummaged through a bin of trinkets and found a small brass compass, the needle stuck pointing east. "Perfect," she said, handing it to Victor. "We're always going west, but I figure it's good to remember where we started." By afternoon, they reached a small town called Milford, a one-stoplight kind of place with a diner called Doris's and a hardware store run by someone named Cliff. They pulled over to grab a meal and stretch. At Doris's, the waitress called Victor Han and brought extra pickles without asking. Rose struck up a conversation with a couple sitting nearby, and within minutes, they were talking about art, jazz, and whether ghosts get lonely. Victor watched her the way she leaned in, listened, responded with a mix of wit and warmth. She was born for moments like this, improvised and human. As they left, the waitress handed Rose a slice of peach pie and a to-go box. "For the road," she said. "You two look like you're chasing something sweet." Back in the RV, as the sun began to drop behind the hills, Victor finally asked, "What were you running from?" Rose didn't answer immediately. She peeled back the foil on the pie and took a bite. "Fame," she said finally. "Or the illusion of it. New York was loud, so loud I couldn't hear my own thoughts. Gallery openings, critics, people pretending to see meaning where there wasn't any. I stopped painting what I loved, started painting what they paid for." She looked out the window. "Eventually, I didn't recognize my own hands." Victor didn't interrupt. He knew what it was like to lose yourself in the grind, to wake up one day and realize you were no longer living, just managing. "My grandma's house was supposed to be a pause button," Rose continued. "But then I met you, and you weren't trying to sell anything. You just existed. Solid, kind, real." She turned to him. "You reminded me what still matters." Victor kept his eyes on the road, but something in his chest shifted. The old guilt, the kind that came from years of saying no, from all the road trips that never happened, from memories packed away like photos in a drawer, began to loosen its grip. That night, parked near a bluff that overlooked a valley of golden fields, Victor took out a small wooden box from under his bed. Inside were letters, some written, some never sent. One was addressed to his son, another to Darlene, unsent since the funeral. He placed them on the small table, stared at them a long time. Rose noticed but didn't speak. She simply sat beside him and placed her hand over his. No questions, just warmth. Before turning in, Victor taped the compass to the dashboard. It still pointed east. "We'll go wherever," he said softly. "But we'll always remember where we came from." Rose smiled. "That's all that matters." And in the quiet of the RV, surrounded by moonlight and miles still ahead, they drifted into sleep, not as two strangers chasing escape, but as fellow travelers slowly uncovering what it meant to return to themselves. The valley behind them faded slowly into the rearview mirror, as they climbed a two-lane highway wrapped in early morning fog. The air was heavy with dew and possibility. Victor drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly over the compass taped to the dashboard, while Rose sipped her coffee from a cracked ceramic mug she refused to trade for a travel cup. They hadn't said much that morning, both content in the kind of silence that only exists when two people are moving in the same direction, not just physically, but emotionally. Somewhere near Knoxville, they pulled into a rest area flanked by thick pines and silence. Victor walked toward the picnic benches with a letter in hand, the one addressed to his son. He held it for a while, fingers tracing the crease, before finally walking over to the trash bin, lifting the lid, then stopping. Behind him, Rose's voice cut gently through the air. "You're not throwing that away." He turned, startled. "You were watching me?" "Victor, we're in an RV. You disappear for longer than 2 minutes, and I start making up murder scenarios." He let the lid drop, sighing. "It's old stuff, outdated." She walked over, stood beside him. "So update it. Or deliver it." He looked away. "We haven't talked since he graduated. That's been 2 years now. Not even a voicemail. What would I even say?" Rose tilted her head. "Start with 'I miss you.' See where it goes." "Yeah." Back on the road, she drove while Victor dozed off, the letter tucked safely in his coat pocket again. She glanced at him a few times, the way his face softened in sleep, no longer marked by the quiet guilt he wore during the day. Her phone buzzed in the console, an email from her agent. Subject line, "Urgent press opportunity." She didn't open it. She let it sit, like so many others, unanswered. Fame was no longer a flame she needed to chase. By late afternoon, they reached a small art supply store in a sleepy town that barely had cell reception. Rose insisted they stop. Inside, the smell of paper, ink, and linseed oil hit her like a nostalgic punch. She wandered the aisles like a kid in a candy store, buying charcoal pencils and watercolors she didn't really need. Victor watched her interact with the elderly clerk, laughing, bartering, connecting like she'd known the woman for years. On the way out, the clerk handed Victor a small wooden carving of a paintbrush and said, "She brings color with her. Don't let her forget." That evening, they parked the RV beside a quiet lake with a small dock and a fire pit built from gathered stone. They ate canned chili and toasted marshmallows like two kids playing pretend, except nothing about it felt fake. Rose pulled out her sketchpad and began drawing by moonlight. "Can I ask you something?" she said without looking up. "Shoot," Victor replied. "Why did you stop fixing cars after your wife passed?" He exhaled slowly. "Because the thing I loved most about it was telling her about the cars after. She always asked the silliest questions like, 'Did the car thank you afterward?' And when she was gone, the stories had nowhere to go." Rose set her pencil down. "So, you parked your gift in the garage along with your grief." He didn't deny it. She nodded thoughtfully. "You know, my paintings used to be full of people I loved, but when I lost myself in the gallery circuit, I stopped painting people and started painting ideas, abstract stuff. It was safer, less emotional, but it never sold as well." "Funny, huh?" Victor looked over. "Not funny, just human." A light rain began to fall, soft and steady, tapping against the RV like a lullaby. Inside, they dried off, played a game of cards, and shared stories neither of them had told anyone in years. Victor talked about the day his son first rode a bike and how he let go of the seat too early, only to chase him down the street like a madman. Rose talked about a painting she gave her mother that got thrown away during a fight and how she painted over the memory 100 times since. Before bed, Victor taped a small photo of his son beside the compass. Rose saw it and said nothing, just gave a quiet smile and turned off the light. That night, sleep came easy for both of them. The next morning, Victor surprised her by driving straight into Nashville. "Change of plans," he said. "Time to deliver that letter." Rose blinked. "You sure?" "Nope, but we're doing it anyway." He parked a few blocks from the campus where his son now taught economics. They walked together, Rose's hand brushing his lightly before he went in alone. She waited in a nearby cafe, nervously biting her lip and doodling on a napkin. 45 minutes passed, then an hour. When he finally returned, he looked shaken but lighter. "We talked," he said simply. "Wasn't easy, but we talked." Rose stood and hugged him without asking. He didn't pull away. They sat together for a moment longer, then walked back to the RV as if their feet knew the path better than their minds did. That night, parked on a hill overlooking the lights of the city, Rose finally opened her agent's email. It was a commission offer 6 figures for a series she'd painted years ago and had since abandoned emotionally. She read it twice, then closed her phone. "You gonna do it?" Victor asked, nodding at the phone in her lap. She shook her head. "Not yet. I'm not done painting for myself." He nodded, understanding the weight of those words. They sat there, watching the city blink beneath them, a world of noise and decisions they were no longer obligated to chase. They pulled into a dusty gas station just off Route 40 as the sun dipped low, casting an orange haze across the pumps and cracked pavement. Victor hopped out to fill the tank, while Rose stretched her legs, stepping onto the rusted curb with a dry sigh. Inside the convenience store, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and the smell of stale coffee mingled with the scent of motor oil wafting in from outside. She wandered through aisles, stocked with jerky, energy drinks, and faded postcards. A man at the counter wore a hat that said, "Route 66, and asked her where she was heading in such a big vehicle. She told him simply, "West, wherever the sunset lands us." He nodded, his gaze drifting over the RV through the front window, as if calculating its mileage like a prophecy. Outside, Victor returned with a pump nozzle tucked under his arm. He noticed Rose lingering at the edge of the lot, staring down the road. He approached, and she fell silent. He held up the nozzle. "Everything okay back here?" She didn't answer right away, then shook her head. "It's nothing. Just, this place feels empty." Victor followed her gaze. The station sat between a scrubby field and a side road that disappeared into nothing. "Sometimes empty is good," he said. "Allows space." She gave a soft laugh. "Space is fine, but not all spaces deserve an echo." They got back in the RV and continued down the highway. Victor let her pick the radio station 50-second rock, crackling between songs. Rose hummed along softly, then sighed. "Can I ask you something serious?" He nodded. "What do you think we're moving toward?" Victor tapped the steering wheel. "I don't know, but I feel less stuck than I did." Rose looked out the window. "Is that enough?" He glanced at her. She met his eyes. He nodded. "Sometimes, yes." They drove on in silence as dusk folded into night, little lights blinking along the horizon. That evening, they made camp beside a narrow river in eastern Arizona. Victor built a fire as Rose unpacked art supplies. He handed her a sandwich and sat back, watching flames dance. "I'm worried," she said after a moment. "We've been talking, but I'm worried you're still waiting for something I can't give." He caught the intensity in her voice. "I've been waiting too long already. Maybe I'm scared." She leaned forward. "Scared of what?" He stared into the burning logs. "Loss." Her expression softened. "You've lost a lot." He nodded, swallowing hard. "I lost her. Then I left my son when I couldn't be here mentally. I lost myself." Rose set her sketch pad aside and reached for his hand. "And now?" Victor closed his fingers around hers. "Now I'm trying to be found." They sat talking until the fire died, swapping stories of childhood summers Victor spent fishing with his dad. Rose's spent painting landscapes on her grandma's porch. They laughed at small memories that felt both distant and dear. The stars above seemed to lean closer, as if eavesdropping on their confession. Rose leaned her head on Victor's shoulder and whispered, I never expected to feel this safe, like I'm not pretending anymore." Victor kissed the top of her head. "That's because you're not." The next morning sunlight was gentle, filtering through juniper branches. Victor woke first and found Rose asleep at the picnic table, sketch in hand. The drawing captured him seated before the fire, lines bold and hopeful. He stared at the image, one hand on her parchment. Then she stirred, opening her eyes slowly. She smiled at him, alarmed he was awake. "That's beautiful," he said quietly. "Number this is," she corrected, pointing to the compass taped inside the door, its needle now spinning freely. "I fixed it last night. It knows neither east nor west. It just knows center." Victor touched it lightly. "And what center?" Rose stood and kissed him softly. "Here." They packed up and moved on toward Flagstaff. On the outskirts of town, amid modern strip malls and neon signs, they stopped at a roadside diner with classic booths and handwritten menus. Inside, the waitress insisted on bringing them 2 milkshakes, on the house, for the adventurers. They shared one strawberry chocolate swirl. Rose watched Victor take the first sip, his mustache flecked with froth. She leaned in. "You still regret not driving cross-country with Darlene?" He swallowed and nodded. "Every damn day." She reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "Then start something new. Not for her, for you." He swallowed hard, finishing the shake. Outside, dusk fell fast. They stepped out and noticed a kid riding a battered bicycle past the diner, waving. The kid's t-shirt had a Route 66 logo. Victor waved back, and the kid beamed before pedaling onward. "That could have been us," Rose said softly. Victor nodded. "Except this time, someone's in the passenger seat." They camped outside Flagstaff that night in a national forest clearing. The RV parked beneath towering pines. Rain began again, teasing, then stopped. They lay awake in silence before Rose asked, "Am I dragging you into another kind of grief?" Victor turned toward her. "No," he said firmly. "This is the kind of grief you survive into. It's not the kind that keeps you parked forever." Before dusk faded entirely, Victor stepped outside. He knelt, pulled a packet from his jacket, and started digging a small hole near a sapling. When Rose came out, he was burying something. She joined him. He placed a rusted key into the ground. "Our first stop," he explained. They covered it and stood, hands brushing. A coyote's howl echoed through the trees, but neither flinched. Instead, they looked at each other and smiled. On the dash, the compass needle came to rest, pointing somewhere true, though neither of them needed to know which way that was. Sunlight slipped through the pine canopy as Victor's phone buzzed, its glow unnaturally bright in the dim inside of the RV. He checked it, an alert from his bank, flagged transaction miles from their path. He frowned, calling customer service to uncover a fraudulent withdrawal. Rose watched him, concern growing. "Another ghost from home?" she asked softly. He sighed, hanging up with a promise the card was blocked. "Yeah, nothing we can't handle." They drove on, rolling north toward Utah. Road signs shifted Flagstaff, Sedona, Monument Valley. Victor navigated with precision, but his shoulders remained tense. At a rest stop overlooking rolling red rocks, Rose stepped out to stretch, while Victor took a call from Cliff, the clerk back in Tennessee. Cliff's voice crackled over the line. Someone had inquired about selling the RV. That someone, Victor realized, must be a buyer who found his listing online before he departed. He assured Cliff it wasn't for sale. He slid the phone into his pocket and joined Rose, who was studying the horizon. "What's wrong?" she said. He shook his head. "Seems there's always a part of me stuck in the past, trying to hand off this thing." He gestured at the RV. "Even though I thought I buried it." She nodded, placing a hand on his arm. "You bury ghosts and they haunt you," she said. "You bury hope and they stay quiet. Just don't bury this." He looked at her, eyes quiet. "I'm trying." They continued west along Route 191, passing through towns with names like Cayenta and Mexican Water. That night they camped near a mesa, the cliffs ablaze in the setting sun, painting their world in gold and crimson. Victor gathered firewood while Rose painted the mesa's silhouette, her brush leaving deep strokes across a large canvas. He admired her concentration, the same intensity that had first drawn him in. She painted long after darkness fell, flashlight by her side and music low, painting not what she saw but what she felt. Finally she stood, stretching, and showed him the canvas. The mesa glowed against a violet sky, a thin ribbon of highway at its base, and a small RV, two tiny figures leaning out the windows. Victor swallowed. "That's beautiful." She shrugged. "It's also true." He paused. "I still worry I'm shortchanging you, taking you places because I can, not because I deserve to." She walked him to the canvas and reached into the painted RV window. "You don't take me anywhere. I don't want to go. We go together." He kept his gaze fixed on the mesa. She asked, voice soft, "Are we okay?" He exhaled. "We are." Morning came crisp and clear. They drove inside the valley, dusty earth layers rising like memory. Victor took an unmarked exit road, winding through dunes and rock formations. The RV bumped along, and Rose leaned her head against the window, eyes peaceful. No one spoke until they reached a dusty rest area with faded interpretive signs explaining ancient petroglyphs. Rose hopped out to explore. Victor followed. They stood before a weathered rock face, etched with centuries-old drawings, spirits, animals, hunters. In that still desert heat, the symbols spoke of survival and endurance. Victor whispered, "People came here thousands of years ago, carved their stories, to stayed." Rose smiled. "And here we are, adding ours." He brushed a fingertip across a petroglyph, an etched figure holding what looked like a staff, and imagined it holding truth as they were. Back in the RV, Victor realized silence could be as honest as words. But later, he slid a map across the table. "Let's take a detour," he said. "I want you to see the place I almost gave up on us." Rose paused, tracing the route. A narrow road marked Dam Overlook. Victor explained that years ago, he'd brought Darlene there to watch the day end over Lake Powell. She'd laughed with him, hopeful. He looked away. "I promised her I'd live for both of us. Then I couldn't find a reason." Rose reached across, placing her hand over his. "You found it again, didn't you?" He nodded. They set off down gravel roads that narrowed between steep canyon walls. The RV rattled, rock dust coating the sides. When they reached the overlook, they sat on the tailgate, legs hanging over the void. Below them, water stretched toward the horizon. Victor handed Rose a flashlight. "Your turn," he said. She illuminated the rock face beside them, etched D+V inside a heart, weathered but visible. Both looked. Victor swallowed. "I carved that after she died. Took me here to scream." Rose squeezed his hand. "And now you bring me." He nodded, pulling a small trowel from the side compartment. Rose watched as he dug near the heart, pulled out a tiny tin box, and handed it to her. Inside, a folded note and a photo of him, younger, with Darlene, both smiling impossibly. His voice trembled. "It's yours now, and his memory too." Rose read the note. "I promise no part of me is buried. I carry her with me. But I choose this." She looked up, tears catching the last rays of sun. They held each other while the canyon echoed around them. That night, they camped at the overlook, wrapped in blankets, the tin box between them. Rose kissed his forehead. "This story is ours now." Victor nodded against her hair. "And ours alone." The RV stood behind them, silent witness to vows unspoken, grief released, and a love reinvented. Morning light crept over the canyon walls as Victor and Rose packed the RV in companionable silence. The ground was still cool beneath their boots, and the air smelled of dry earth and pine. Victor slid the tin box into his jacket pocket and closed the RV door. Rose handed him the folded note again and whispered, "You don't have to hide that from me." He smiled, small but real, and nodded. They drove through the desert, the road winding under a blazing sky. As they neared Moab, the landscape changed red rock formations, giving way to green orchards, and then, unexpectedly, a cluster of buildings that housed a local art gallery. Rose's heart tightened. She hadn't expected this stop, but neither had Victor. The gallery's owner was someone Rose admired, a mentor from New York who had moved west to open an experimental art space. Victor must have called ahead. He had a way of moving without making noise that suited him well. They entered side by side. The gallery was quiet, the walls filled with abstract paintings layered in bold strokes and muted tones. Rose's mentor, Marisol, appeared from the back office, her silver hair pulled back in a bun, eyes sharp yet soft. She paused when she saw Rose, then Victor beside her. "Rose," she said, voice low. Victor nodded respectfully. "Nice to meet you." Marisol led them to a hallway lined with Rose's early work portraits of family and strangers, vibrant and full of emotion. None of the abstract pieces were there. Victor noticed Rose's breath catch. "These are the ones I almost left behind," she whispered. Marisol turned to him. "You brought her back," she said. Victor simply offered a slight nod. They stepped into Marisol's office, a small room with a skylight and wide wooden desk. Marisol took a breath. "I'd love to show these again. Give people a chance to connect to the heart of your art." Rose shook her head. "I'm not ready." Victor placed a hand on her arm. "You don't have to do anything you don't want." Marisol nodded. "I understand, but if and when you do, I'll be here." They left without fanfare. Outside, Rose leaned against the RV, the desert wind pulling at her hair. She turned to Victor. "Why bring me here?" He took the painting of the canyon etched at the overlook out of his pocket, Rose's masterpiece, faintly smudged by travel. "To show you that the world we left doesn't have to define us," he said. Her eyes glistened. But what if I go back to painting for them again and lose myself? He tucked his hand into hers. Then paint for us first. For this, he said, lifting brushstrokes between them. They drove on toward Salt Lake City, the road straight and long. Victor chatted quietly about old highways, but each sentence was held in reserve as they both processed the morning. Rose picked at her sketchbook. She traced the canyon lines with careful fingers. Outside, mountains rolled past, dust shades of gray and blue. By mid-afternoon, they reached the outskirts of Salt Lake City. Victor parked near the river promenade. They sat by the water's edge. Rose finally spoke. I loved Marisol's gallery, but I need to know I'm not stepping into the same trap. Victor looked at the river. You don't have to. That world isn't all or nothing. She watched ducks drift on the current. There's a part of me that's still scared I'll erase what drew me here. He squeezed her hand. Then don't. She smiled, small but determined. The air shifted as evening closed in. They joined a small open mic night in a nearby cafe, local poets reading verses about mountains, rivers, loss, and hope. Rose listened, mesmerized. When a voice at the mic invited others, Victor leaned close. Your turn. She shook, laughter bubbling. Not tonight, he chuckled. Okay, but soon. They left under starlight, the city quiet behind them. Later, Rose scribbled in her notebook. Chapter 7. I'm beginning to step back into the world, but on my own terms. Victor watched her by lantern light, her pen moving confidently. He realized the journey wasn't just external. She was reclaiming pieces of herself he'd always seen, but she'd forgotten how to hold. That night in the RV, they lay awake. Rose turned to Victor and whispered, Thank you for believing that I could be both brave and myself. He kissed her forehead and replied, I believe in you. They drifted to sleep under a sky of possibility, each pulse of breath steady and sure, ready for whatever dawn would bring. They rolled into Provo late afternoon, the Wasatch Range framing their path like silent sentinels. Victor parked the RV behind a modest coffee shop with hand-lettered signs promising fresh brew and real talk. Rose stepped out, rubbing her palms against the front of her jeans. I need caffeine, she said, voice tight around the words. Victor nodded, slinging his jacket over a chair inside. The coffee shop smelled like earth tones and spilled espresso. They slid into a corner table. Rose stared at the menu, but didn't order. Victor flagged down the barista black drip for him, chai latte for her, and slid the drinks across. Thanks, she whispered. She cradled the mug, steam swirling against her face. Outside the window, passers-by hurried by, lives carried by urgency and errands. Victor watched her, noticing the tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw clenched as though holding back a speech. What's on your mind? He asked. She looked away, tracing the chipped wood grain of the table. I drafted an email last night, she said slowly, to Marisol with the early work. I was ready. But then I read it this morning and felt like a stranger wrote it. Victor nodded, understanding. You wanted it to say you choose you not the noise. She sighed. But words weigh more than I thought. I don't know how to tell her no without feeling like I wasted her belief in me. He reached across, taking her hand. No one wasted anything. You're choosing yourself. That's the hardest choice of all. Rose exhaled, letting her fingers relax. They drank in silence. This was the first silence that felt heavy, not from comfort, but from unspoken doubts. They left the shop and walked by the Provo River, water tumbling over moss-covered stones. Rose paused, watching a leaf float downstream. It's funny, she said. Water doesn't care if it's going against the rock. It just finds its way. Victor smiled. It's persistent. She shrugged. I'm wondering if I am. They continued north, the RV humming beneath them, now laden with both art supplies and unspoken fears. Victor turned down a gravel path marked Observation Point. The path narrowed, trees closing in. They descended to a clearing overlooking a valley where clouds hovered low. Rose stepped out, breathing in the crisp air. Victor handed her a wrapped canvas. I finished it last night, he said quietly. Rose unwrapped it to find the creek from their first night together, now painted in acrylic on stretch canvas. Moonlit water shimmering, their RV tucked in the distance, and two figures in silhouette standing at the water's edge. At its base, a line of text, We are here now, Tears welled in Rose's eyes. He cleared his throat. "I wanted you to have something you didn't ask for. To remind you this isn't a pause." She looked up, voice thick. "It's beautiful." He hesitated, then said, "I also wrote something." He pulled out his phone and read from the note he'd carried since his son. "I choose today, choose us, choose the unfinished roads that still need our footprints. I'm here." Her hand found his, colors blending. They stood side by side, watching dusk bleed across the valley. Night found them parked under tall pines again. Rose dabbed at her eyes with her sleeve. "I need to send that canvas," she said finally. "To Marisol." Victor nodded. "And the email?" She swallowed. "I'll write it tomorrow." He kissed her temple. "Go to sleep." Together they settled in, the RV quiet around them but alive with intention. In the small hours, Victor sat alone by the window. He thought of his son, what his voice sounded like, what he'd say now if Victor called him. He wrote a message in his mind. "I'm starting to find my way back. I hope you'll walk with me." The weight of words pulsed inside him, not heavy but true. Morning light came again. They packed up and rolled onward toward Salt Lake City, hearts heavy with silent truths but unburdened in their bond. They drove through valleys and canyons, each mile marking a choice to keep traveling with words still needed, but not stalled by fear. They crossed into Idaho as the sun fought through cloud cover ready for a thunderstorm. Victor navigated a winding highway that climbed into the foothills. Thin mist rolled over the fields like ghostly fingers. Rose sat beside him in quiet reverie, eyes on the shifting landscape, hands lightly tapping her sketchbook closed, as if closing a chapter. She'd finally sent the email to Marisol, explaining that she wanted to paint again, but only when she felt the call, not for public acclaim. Victor smiled when she told him. "It's your voice," he'd said. Now, thunder rumbled distant, and they both sensed something more than weather. The RV rolled through a curve into a clearing beside a narrow creek carved between rock walls. Victor slowed to a stop. "Let's camp here tonight," he said softly. Rose nodded. "Somewhere blank canvases fear?" he teased. She laughed, relieved. Outside, clouds darkened, and they worked together setting up tent extension, propane lamps, draping tarps. They moved with familiarity now, silent gestures, confident arrangements. He chopped wood while she gathered kindling. Rain started soft, then stronger, breaking on metal. They stepped inside the RV, clothing damp but spirits warm. Rose built a small fire in the outdoor pit. He brewed tea, cinnamon, spice. They sat on foldable chairs under the awning, wind rattling the canvas sides. The creek murmured as backup, blending with rain into a lullaby. "What are you thinking?" Victor asked over the rhythmic patter. Rose held her mug. "That we nearly let fear define us." He caught her gaze. "We did for a while." She leaned forward. "I was afraid I'd lose the feeling for painting, or the man reminding me how." Victor watched the creek. "I was afraid I'd drag you into grief that never leaves." She reached for his hand. "You gave me courage, without knowing it." He squeezed her fingers. "And you reminded me how to carry my past without living in it." A flash of lightning cracked across the sky. Rain intensified. They held each other, enveloped by storm sound, safety in numbers. She said softly, "Or maybe we reminded each other we deserve again." He kissed the top of her head. "We do." They moved inside as thunder rolled closer. In the RV, they lit candles, closing curtains. Rose sketched by lamplight a line drawing of the rain-soaked awning. Her and Victor huddled beneath it. She passed it to him. He traced the lines, the arc of her shoulder, the tilt of her head resting on his chest. "That's us," he said. She smiled despite dampness. They sat in quiet, the world outside raging but their bubble intact. Victor opened his phone. He drafted a text to his son, no pressure, just a line. "I'm pulling your weight again. Miss you." He stared at it. Rose brushed her cheek gently with her fingers. "Send it when you're ready." He nodded, reading it one more time, then hit send. He exhaled as though breathing had been a chore. Rose kissed him. "You did it." Outside, rain slowed. They fell asleep holding hands. Inside Rose's dreams, oil paints unfurled across an empty canvas. Inside Victor's, his son's face appeared in a sunlit doorway. Morning came gentle. The storm broke fully, leaving droplets glistening on leaves and earth. They emerged, stepping into damp light. Victor tucked his arm around Rose. She leaned in. Behind them, The RV stood patient, a witness to storms weathered and journeys binding two hearts together. The morning fog lifted like a curtain as they rolled out onto Highway 12, heading west along the Salmon River Canyon. Sunlight dappled through pines, casting dancing patterns across the dashboard. Victor steered confidently, the compass mounted on the dash swiveling, now free as if convinced they didn't need a fixed direction. Rose leaned forward, pressed her canvas tote against her leg. "What do you think we'll find in Oregon?" she asked softly. Victor glanced at her, hand steady on the wheel. "Maybe the next part of us," he said. "Or maybe nothing, and that'll be enough." She nodded, unsnapping her sketchbook. "I want to draw the river," she said, scanning water strung in light below steep cliffs. "It feels like time is moving differently here." Victor smiled. "Maybe because it is." They stopped at a wooden overlook with a rickety railing. Victor helped Rose down the steps to the water's edge. The river ran clear and fast, white froth breaking against dark stones. Rose knelt, trailing her fingers in the rush. Victor leaned on a nearby boulder, watching. He thought about Darlene and the dream she once planted, a cabin by the river where they'd spend summers. He swallowed and approached. "This was her dream," he said quietly. Rose looked up at him. He nodded toward the far bank where trees leaned over the river. "I never built it because my son was small. Then I stopped dreaming." She reached for his hand. "Then start again," she said. "We built something new." End of 41. They packed a picnic cheese, fresh fruit, a loaf of bread. Rose had insisted on buying from a small-town bakery. They sat by the river, shared a meal while ferns winked in the breeze. A family of ducks glided by, joined by ducklings. Rose tapped her pen against her mug. "What if we build that cabin?" she said, voice soft but determined. Victor paused mid-chew. "You mean, like stop the RV journey?" She shook her head. "Not stop. Add roots, add a purpose." He looked thoughtfully. "I'd like that." She smiled at him the way she smiled when she knew she was loved. He loved that smile. Driving resumed, the landscape transitioning from canyon to orchard, then endless fields. Victor switched to AM radio, an old country song playing. Rose hummed along, her voice merging with the hum of the tires. Victor caught himself smiling often at ridiculous things she said, at a sign pointing to Nez Perce NHP, at the way light flickered on her hair. It wasn't free from pain, but pain no longer ruled them. By late afternoon they reached Boise. Rose steered them onto a street lined with poplars. Victor parked outside a small arts festival by the riverfront park. Rose looked at him, surprised. "I didn't plan this," he said, "but I think you might like it." She followed him through tents selling pottery, woodwork, landscape paintings. She paused by a booth where a woman taught children to paint river scenes on rocks. Rose crouched, picked up a blank rock, and painted a tiny creek scene. A small boy watched, then painted alongside her. She helped him with shading, laughing when he painted a rainbow trout with neon pink spots. Victor watched, his heart swelling. He realized this was the first time Rose had shared her gift freely since they departed. She wasn't performing, she was giving. Night fell. Festival lights sparkled on the river. Music drifted. They walked hand in hand, tasting local cider, listening to a folk duo, swaying off-beat. Rose rested her head on his shoulder. Victor kissed her temple. She whispered, "I feel alive." He replied, "Me too." Back at the RV, they tore open a paper bag, pretzels and local cheese. They ate by lantern light, voices soft. Rose said, "I emailed Marisol again." Victor blinked. "What'd you say?" She smiled shyly. "I told her I want my voice to be personal, not performative. I'm ready when it's honest." He raised his mug. "To honesty." She clinked hers back. "And to building things that last." They lay in their separate sleeping bags, hands still touching across the gap. In the half-dark, Rose whispered, "Do you think we can really build something?" Victor answered quietly, "If we keep choosing each other, yes." They slept to the sound of distant water and festival laughter floating through the night air. In the dawn, they awoke with purpose. A new section of road ahead and a future unfolding beyond miles. The highway stretched east-west before them, but in the rush of the morning light, neither of them cared much for directions anymore. They had each other, and that was answer enough. They woke in a meadow dusted with morning mist, the RV parked beside a cluster of pines that whispered in the breeze. Victor stirred first, stepping into the crisp air as Rose brewed coffee over the small propane stove outside. He looked east, where the sun hovered over distant ridges. "Perfect morning," she said, handing him a chipped mug. He took a sip, warmth expanding through him. Perfect indeed. They finished and packed quietly, sense of purpose humming between them. The previous night's promise lingered. Today they would scout cabin sites. By mid-morning they rolled down a gravel road toward a valley dotted with clearings and streams. Rose sketched while Victor drove, pausing now and then to point at sunlit hollows or fir groves. He slowed over a moss-lined creek bridge. "Stop here," he said. She stepped out, breath visible in the cool air. Before them lay a flat patch of earth bordered by a creek on one side and tall pines guarding the other. Sunlight filtered through branches, spotlighting a mossy stump like a throne. "This," he said softly. She knelt, running her fingers through the moss. "It feels alive." Victor crouched beside her, and waiting. They smiled at each other, two people pausing on the threshold of something bigger than a journey. They unpacked the RV tools, handsaw, level, and sturdy lumber Victor had picked up in Boise. As they worked, sweat mingled with laughter, and Rose sketched framing lines in the dirt. Victor shared stories of building tree forts with his son, measuring planks, securing corners with care. Rose talked about painting murals as a child, how walls were canvases. Together they erected the skeleton of a simple cabin, nothing grand, but strong. Beams slotted into brackets, floorboards fitted tight. At noon they paused for sandwiches, then resumed until late afternoon. By sunset they stood back, shading their eyes from the golden light, beside a half-built space, 4 walls, a floor, and empty windows looking out to pine and creek. Victor passed Rose a hammer. She tapped the final nail into the last corner beam. They clapped, breathless and elated. Victor brushed sawdust from his jeans and hugged her. She rested her head against his chest. The cabin stood silent, glowing. Victor whispered, "Our first home." Rose looked up, eyes bright. "Our second chance." They stepped inside, echoing their footsteps in the empty space. He held her close. "We'll finish this," he said, "one step at a time." She nodded. "Like our journey." They spent the evening under the cabin's emerging roof. Victor built a simple fire pit outside while Rose sketched lantern light dancing on pine needles. They ate stew warmed in a pot, words flowing soft and hopeful. Rose said, "When I paint this, it has to feel like hope." Victor looked at her face in lantern glow. "It will." They stayed late, then retired to the RV, shoulders tired but heart steady. At dawn, Rose woke in the RV and slipped out to stand inside the cabin, the early light revealing the skeleton of their dream. She imagined walls painted with memories and shelves of small treasures. Her voice caught as she realized this cabin wasn't just wood, it was a canvas for both their lives. Victor joined her silently, his presence steady. He put an arm around her. "We'll fill it with laughter, paintings, stories, and time." She leaned in, and forgiveness, and second chances. He kissed her forehead, his promise unspoken but understood. They spent the day cutting window frames, laying boards, and lining up support posts, each nail hammered a statement. "We're here, we're staying, we're building something real." When the sun dropped low again, they paused to toast hot cider by the fire pit, embers glowing bright in the dark. Rose looked at Victor. "This is so much more than I dreamed." Victor smiled. "Yeah, but it's exactly what I needed." They roasted marshmallows, laughter echoing off tall pines, and the cabin behind them glowed with possibility. Night fell, and they lay in sleeping bags in the cabin, the half-finished roof above them. Rain pattered softly, roofing not yet complete, but Rose snuggled closer. "It's imperfect," she said. He kissed her. "Perfectly us," she whispered. "Thank you for believing in this, in us." He held her tight. "Thank you for coming along." They fell asleep to the sound of rain and the promise of tomorrow. The road meandered westward as the final miles of their journey stretched ahead, the sky transforming into shades of rose, lavender, and gold. Victor steered the RV along a narrow coastal highway, waves crashing just beyond the guardrail. Rose sat beside him, sketchbook open on her lap, charcoal strokes capturing the ocean's edge and the soft curl of salt-swept fog. She glanced at Victor, noticing how the setting sun caught the silver in his hair, how the light softened the lines of his face. They pulled off at a secluded overlook. The RV's engine stalled as Victor parked, and they stepped out together. The world hushed. Rose's canvas stood on an easel she had brought for this moment, a painting of them under the cabin roof, their silhouettes glowing by lantern light. She set it against the RV door. Victor studied it, emotions flickering across his face. She whispered, "It's our story." He nodded, voice thick. "It is." They walked to the edge of the bluff, salt breeze tousling their hair. Below, surf crashed against black rocks. They embraced, long and without words, as if sealing the past and stepping firmly into what lay ahead. A lone gull cried across the wind. Rose sighed against his chest. "We made it." Victor kissed her head. Together. Victor reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out the small tin box from Utah. He opened it, revealing the folded note and old photo of him and Darlene. Rose stepped back respectfully. Victor read aloud, "I promise no part of me is buried. I carry her with me, but I choose this." He folded it carefully and placed it beside the painting. "She's here," he said. "And so are we." Rose smiled, tears bright. "And so does hope." They returned to the RV for a simple dinner: grilled fish and fresh vegetables bought from a nearby stand. They shared it without need for music or talk, just presence and the sound of the sea below. Afterwards, they sat on folding chairs by the bluff, lanterns at their feet and the Pacific stretching beneath the sky. Victor turned to Rose. "I have one more promise." She tilted her head. "I'll help you finish the cabin, then we'll fill it with art and family, and we'll come here every year." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Yes." They watched the sun sink completely. Victor reached into his pocket for his phone and sent a text. "Invite sent. We're building home." Then he deleted it before sending, realizing this message was theirs, no one else's. He handed her his hand instead. She intertwined her fingers with his. Under the violet sky, they made plans, soft voices mapping walls and windows, seasons and celebrations. The RV, their journey's vessel, stood behind them like a wise old companion, its paint dulled but spirit shining. The gull cried again, then silence returned. They leaned into each other, present in a moment that held every mile they'd traveled. This story is a gentle yet profound reminder that healing doesn't come in grand gestures or perfect plans, but in small steps, shared moments, and the courage to begin again. It speaks to those who have known loss and carried it quietly, who've kept their dreams on a dusty shelf. Through Victor and Rose, we see that love true, patient love can bloom again, even in unlikely places. And sometimes, the most powerful journey is not the one that takes you around the world, but the one that brings you back to yourself and to someone willing to build a new home with you.